Welcome Michael Manrod and his fabulous panelists. Oh, you want to use this? Well, yeah, you guys can pass that.
There we go. Sure. All right. Welcome and thank you, Kim, and thanks for an awesome event and for everybody coming out. Mike Manrod, Grand Canyon Education. Super excited to be here with you all, and we've got a really great panel and a fun discussion. We were joking as we walked through some of the topics we're going to discuss that what we planned will probably be nothing like what we actually discussed, because that's the fun part, is letting it really unfold as a dialogue. But I'll hand it over. Do you want to start off the intros, Lester?
Oh, sure. Yeah, Lester Godsey, Chief Information Security Officer for Maricopa County.
The Maricopa County. Hello, everyone. I'm Bianca Lochner. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the City of Scottsdale.
Anthony Dezilva from WWT. I'm an enterprise architect at WWT.
Awesome, thanks. So, I think we all know, like, the threat landscape has just been nuts lately, right? Obviously, there's been a lot of nation-state activity. There's been a massive rise of cybercrime. And then we've seen, almost a democratization of advanced tactics and tools, as what used to be the genre of nation states years ago and very, very advanced projects are now tool sets and frameworks that have very few barriers to entry and that are readily available to threat actors, right, at the lowest levels of cybercrime. So it really stacks the deck in favor of the attacker. It gives us a lot of challenges. So on the panel today, we're blessed to have, great experts from the perspective of CISO, of the fourth largest county in the country, CIO at the city level, and getting that executive perspective. And then Anthony's just helped a lot of organizations from a lot of perspectives over the years and is currently on the side of consulting and advisory services, helping organizations get more secure. So kicking off the discussion, we're going to kick it off with Lester. What are the things, like, what are the challenges that you see that face Maricopa County as Russia has invaded Ukraine, as things get really hot? You mentioned on your keynote, election security. What are some of the unique challenges, and then what are your top priorities in response to that?
Yeah, so to give you all some tangible examples. So I was sharing this in conversation with a couple of you, so I apologize if I'm repeating myself. But specific to the Russian-Ukraine incident, or invasion of Ukraine from Russia, let's be clear. Literally the day after, so we geo-block all Russian IP address ingress and egress at Maricopa County. So the day after the invasion, we saw the number of Russian connection attempts from that IP address space double from what the norm was. That weekend, we saw that increase to 10 times what the norm is. And then I can't go into a lot of details, but we did also detect and report to our federal partners what our federal partners, because we don't do attribution, to be clear. We don't have the resources, nor is it our position to do attribution, right? But based off our engagement with our federal partners, we believe we caught adware network that was infected by a Russian nation state. And so those are examples that we've seen just directly with the Russian-Ukraine event. But specific to things that we're seeing uniquely at Maricopa County, obviously I mentioned the elections. And I guess to tie on to what your introduction, Mike, is that we've seen a variety of different threat actors, tactics, and groups. And so what, to your point, earlier point, has traditionally been in the purview of a nation-state attack, we've seen now advanced persistent threat actors, as well as hacktivists and engaged and motivated individuals. And so we've seen a range of DDoS attacks, data scraping. We've seen a combination of supply chains slash third-party, fourth-party type of attack. We've also seen, and obviously, a lot of misinformation and disinformation campaigns. So unfortunately, and I think a lot of you in the audience have heard me speak on this topic, the impact of social media that it's had on us in tangible ways, both from a cybersecurity risk perspective as well as increased physical or kinetic risk, has they're all things that are unique and something that we hadn't had to contend with, especially not to this degree, even 3-4 years ago. So.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a unique challenge. And I mean, for those of you starting out your career, early in your career, if you want to get a really solid skill set, work for Maricopa County, work for a city, right? Because
as long as you're willing to be underpaid. So just to be clear.
But you'll be paid in experience. Yeah. No. You know, Bianca, kind of expanding the conversation over to you. You know, with that threat landscape, yeah, how do you manage and report on the risk from a city level?
Yeah, and similarly, we've seen those attacks increase, and Lester mentioned the geophysical kinetic threats that we have to have increased awareness of, because the city is responsible for assets like utilities, water resources, and health information of our residents in terms of our safety units being engaged with the community. So definitely increased awareness, and with that, we have to make sure that our leaders, our mayors, city councils, city managers, and other leaders are very much aware of those threats and what we need to do together to protect our city and our community, right? So what I find very helpful is to really provide a realistic view of the organization, what we're facing, right? To not overstate or understate the threat, right? Really talk in real terms, really be able to be specific, but not too specific, so be able to really clarify the risk. Also, please, you have to place everything in a business context, right? Because we provide business services to our community, to our business partners in the city. So we want to make sure that we provide information that the board, the council can make decisions, but not really be super technical in terms of what we're sharing, right? So just clarify and provide information for them to enable them to make those decisions in terms of business. And then again, going back to business, we have to balance the need to protect the organization, but also be able to provide those services, right? So there has to be a balance there. And for that, we have to have strong governance and strong collaboration among all our departments, all our leaders, and be able to really inform those who make those decisions, or make those decisions together, and then be able to also help the council be able to ask pertinent questions, right? So help them formulate those questions with them, so then we can expand on the conversation and be able to provide appropriate funding or resourcing or whatever that might be.
Yeah, I mean, wise words, Bianca. I mean, it's so easy. I mean, we fall into the trap sometimes of thinking security is the center of the universe. And sometimes we need to remember that we're securing something so that a business value for a city, a state, a company, a county can be delivered. So great thoughts. You know, Anthony, you come at it from the other perspective I mean, you've been on all sides of it actually, but now you're coming at it from the other perspective of helping people to solve their security problems. Like, what mistakes do you see people make? Like, what are some of the biggest mistakes, and how should people fix them? Yeah, okay, that'll be the rest of the panel. I'm gonna go get a drink, I'll be back. No.
I think the mistake I really see is we're not talking enough, right? As security professionals, as leaders in Arizona, we're not we've done a good job with threat intelligence, but what about the solutions? Like sharing the solutions, sharing what we found, the tactics and the tools that would actually make a difference, that basically we have an open conversation about that and not being afraid to talk about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, communication gaps at the end of the day, we could probably boil down a whole lot of other problems and they'd come back to sharing of information and communication. Love it. Back to you, Lester. You mentioned both in your answer a moment ago and in your keynote this afternoon about fourth party risk, and I love that Dine example. Boy, that's just the perfect use case. But this is a loaded question, obviously. But do you think we're going to see more of that? And if so, what should we be doing? Both either more of or what should we be doing that we're not doing to deal with supply chain, vendor, software supply chain risk?
Yeah, obviously, as you alluded to, is a loaded question. So the short answer is yes. And but for multiple reasons. One, just given the take rate of cloud and third-party services, by extension, the more that organizations adopt that as opposed to provide those services on-prem, the more we'll see those sort of third-party, fourth-party attacks or issues, I should say. The other aspect is, frankly, the bad guys, right? So it's similar to conversations you and I have actually had, Mike, about where the most attractive attack surface is with cloud technologies. You know, unless it's a improperly set up S3 bucket, and that's more of a permissions issue, you know, the hackers aren't going to expend all their time and energy trying to hack heavy metal, like, you know, Azure, AWS, or whatever. One of the things I think they're going to go after is APIs, right? And so same concept with vendor risk management. That's where the low-hanging fruit is. So, you know, if I'm not necessarily maybe going to go after, hopefully nobody from Target's here. I'm not going to go after Target, but I may go after their HVAC vendor, right? Because they probably have less stringent security controls in place. I'm going to find out who, you know, Maricopa County or, you know, the federal government rely on for DNS resolution services, for you know, whatever, kind of customer relationship management software, and find out where those gaps are and poke and prod with the assumption that it's going to be a little bit softer and easier to get in as opposed to that third-party entity, especially the bigger entities out there. I would say, and so I'm very cognizant of the fact I work for government, so take this with a grain of salt when I say it would be nice to see some sort of whether industry compliance standard or regulatory requirement that required vendors and in that ecosystem to report. Not necessarily disclose every little bit of what they do, but rather, you know, so going back to the Dyn example, you know, if Dyn was, if there was more regulation in place to talk about what the dependencies are and reporting requirements along those lines, I think response would have been improved. And then any sort of standard with regards to basic frameworks, maybe starting off with, you know, what is required with the SOC 2 and building upon that to ensure that everybody's operating at a modicum of, you know, security might be a good start along those lines. But I recognize I work for the government and I'm proposing additional government involvement, which may not be popular with all of you. I recognize that, so.
Well, wouldn't it be cool if you had at least the level of assurance if you buy a $500,000 piece of software or a $100,000 SaaS package? Wouldn't it be cool if it came with the level of assurance of a box of Cheerios, like an ingredients list, how many grams, how many calories, how many grams of sugar? All right, Bianca, what do you think? I mean, I think we should keep going on this.
Yes, no, I think it's the challenge going after Lester. He has a perfect answer, and not much to add there. No, it's true.
I don't remember what I just said, though. So.
Well, I do. But no, so similarly, 25% of our application systems are already in the cloud, and we're right. We're not cloud first, but always. But obviously, we're looking right at migrating some of our systems that are aging or we have to replace, moving those to the cloud, and we're being very systematic about that. So we're formalizing our cloud strategy to include those security controls. And so for every cloud partnership, we are making sure that we have a cybersecurity review, right? But at the same time, for smaller vendors, right, it's challenging to ask them to have a SOC 2 certification. So having a regulation that's, right, some sort of regulation that's more stringent than what we currently have in place would help us as an organization with this type of due diligence. So hopefully we'll see that in the future. Maybe Lester is changing the world for sure, for the better. But yeah, we're doing everything we can. And also we develop many of our systems in-house. So we're looking at cloud native development. So with that, obviously API is top of mind, and making sure that we have built-in security from the start. So.
Yeah, Bianca, I think that's spot on, right? Because in fixing problems, what do we tend to do holistically as humans? We tend to go too far the other way. Like I've had a few conversations with different people joking about this notion. But imagine you're talking to a vendor, and Bianca, you mentioned small shops, and you're like, all right, you need to be SOC 2. We need you to answer these 300 questions, and I want to see your latest pen test. And then the person on the other line's like, sir or ma'am, I sell you toilet paper. And, I mean, there's a point where we have to draw a line there, and we don't want to be so exclusive that we can't do business with small businesses, startups. We lose innovation. So I think you do a great job of framing the other side of that equation too, Bianca. All right, Anthony, fourth party risk, dependency risk, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think everything that was to be said has pretty much been said about it. I think from an organization, at least the way we look at it, providing the guidance, the templates, the things like that, again, we've all developed these, we've all got these things, and if sharing it with these small businesses, we'll at least get them to a level. We may not get them to certify, but we'll get them to a level that was better than where they were, right? So I think that's really kind of using the knowledge we've already had, building that knowledge base, and being able to disseminate that knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, that's really spot on. I mean, how many feel like in your security programs you reinvent the same thing, or you've worked at different companies? And yeah, I think, Anthony, what you're bringing up, yeah, me too. I mean, what you bring up of like having standards and frameworks and templates and sharing, I mean, I think it nails it and caps it nicely.
And then Lester talked about becoming a cloud broker for the organization. So then it's an advanced role to also broker the vendor application process for those regulations, right? So that's probably something that will also be part of that. No, but so you have to, obviously everything is connected.
And then, kind of pivoting, right? Because, we're looking at the threat, we're looking at, different ways the threat we can get in. We talked about that a lot today. But once we, say we're in a security program, we're trying to make it better, and we've got a plan, how do you effectively communicate, risks with executive management, with leadership? Yeah, I mean, you mentioned having 56 departments, Lester. Like, how do you manage that? That gives me a headache just thinking about it.
Yeah, so a couple things. One, I don't do that by myself. I have an incredible team, and so I have my role and responsibility, and they have theirs, right? So I trust that they'll do their job, and hopefully they trust that I'll do mine. But with that being said, and so for those of you, I was talking to a gentleman earlier today who was interested in possibly exploring what it would take to be a CISO. It requires a lot of interaction with other folks in a non-technical environment. And so being able to have that level of conversation, right? And so to your specific question, Mike, it's really understanding what motivates the organization, and depending on who you're talking to, what's their priority and what's important, and using that taxonomy or language and couching it in InfoSec terms. And so this shouldn't come as no surprise to anybody who's been following Maricopa County in the news, but we're a little hypersensitive when it comes to brand reputation, right? And so oftentimes that's the way I will couch the conversation. So I think I mentioned in the keynote, we talked about doing a tabletop exercise on insider threat, right? And so I didn't have any problems. I didn't have to twist any arms to get people, including the Board of Supervisors, Chief of Staffs, the Arizona Department of Secretary of State's Department to participate, because that was all something that they were self-motivated about. Putting in terms of risk or whatever motivates the organization is critical, and then explaining. And so you and I were talking about this earlier, Bianca, about being an organization where you're not focused necessarily on saying no, but making the organization aware what the potential outcomes or risks are if they continue on a certain path, right? And how we can assist them along those lines. And so I've had a lot of success with respect to that, and being able to take very nebulous, sometimes very amorphous terms or concepts and boil it down in a tangible way that's meaningful to them, And so it's really gone a long way. And honestly, from a CISO perspective, if you don't know how to talk that way and to a certain degree be a good marketer of what it is that you can do and what you can't do, then you're not going to be successful in the role. So,
Yeah, I think that's definitely spot on. I mean, it comes down to, I love what you said about understanding what they want, right? Because I mean, what do I want? I've got like architecture drawings and all this sort of stuff, and I know I've made the mistake of rushing in with those to an executive meeting, and it's usually a short meeting. All right, Bianca, taking kind of the CIO perspective of being responsible for security, but also for the bigger picture and that next level of executive coordination. What do you think, like board members, city planners, county boards, whatever that governing layer that we all have, whatever you label it, like what do you think they want to hear about security? What's their interest level? What do you think?
I think they want to know that we're 100% secure, right? Who doesn't?
Yeah.
No, obviously, they're very much aware, right, that the current landscape. They see the news, they talk to their counterparts in other organizations or the city, so they're very much aware of the risk we are facing. At the same time, they're also trusting that we have a brilliant cybersecurity team. Our CISO is doing everything to grow the program, everything possible, advocating, influencing. So we have to trust, right? But also be able to ensure that there is awareness across the organization and also that we have distributed ownership, right? So one of the things that I think makes us successful is the fact that we engage every member of our organization in terms of, what they need to do and what's their responsibility to protect the city's assets, data, everything that comes with that. So we regularly engage with them in various forums, various communications. We even award them from being responsible, right, and reacting in a very positive way, and we appreciate that. So really, that allows us to grow the program with them, right, for them to be part of it, to ensure that they know they're at the center, they're we're one unit, so that helps a lot. And obviously, then we can go deeper with some of specific groups in terms of what kind of data they need to have access, what their stewardship of that data needs to look like. We also developed a new regulation for data privacy, so we have a great smart city roadmap, and with that, we know we're going to be collecting increasingly amount of data, and we want to make sure that, again, we're good stewards of that. And everyone in the organization who is part of that collections, is responsible for storage, usage of that data, knows what they're responsible for. But at the same time, we want to be able to engage the community and have them be also part of this journey, right, to make sure they have a way to opt in or opt out and how their data is being used. So that's the next phase for us, to build our mechanisms through which we can allow them to have a say of what happens to that data. So.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like vision, engagement, and stewardship, and connecting the engagement and stewardship around security to that vision. Yeah, and that smart city tie-in makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think every org has its visionary thing that they want to do, but want to do securely, or it'll be a disaster. Thanks, Bianca. Anthony, kind of to look at it from you get to see it from a lot of different perspectives, right? The executive perspective, but also helping people implement the technical plans. Yeah, how do you see the communications piece of taking our pipe dreams of strategies to reduce risk and then converting them into reality?
I think the first thing is trust, right? It's if anybody we're working with, if we don't have that level of trust, it doesn't matter, right? So I think building that trust, building the relationships that you have, and then being able to jointly solution, right? Because I think part of it is even going in, even as a vendor, you don't have all the answers. So I think creating that joint approach to that, making the time, but inside of that trust, going with, most of the time I think we're putting solutions together that we don't know will work or not, right? We're chasing a target, and we're predicting what that target will be, but you don't necessarily, like we said, the best laid plan won't survive first contact, right? So then the same thing here is just having that trust to work together to find the solution, instead of just going, okay, well, cookie cutter solution, this will work, or trying to get something like that to work. And being able to say, it's like, no, you're crazy, don't implement that. This is how it's going to go if you do.
I can also
Yeah, go
from
for it.
our perspective. So a principle, right? We talk about innovation. So Scottsdale is, in our reputation we are a very innovative city, and we are like that because, again, we have that mindset. We have leadership support and vision, but also we're very much focused on partnerships, right? Internally, breaking the silos, making sure that departments, right, communicate. We're focused on the business needs, city goals, alignment to that, but also partnerships. So we're willing very much to pilot and try new things. But again, right, we want to make sure that everything we try can be sustainable and also can be, it doesn't have to be necessarily meeting specific needs for one group, can be then sort of used, right, more universally. So that investment has a better ROI. So being able to pilot helps really identify, right, if this is the right solution that can be sustainable and provide some forward motion. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So it's great. Like I think we've cycled through, risk and strategy, and then how to sell that strategy. One of the next things that we have to figure out once we sell that strategy is, okay, who's going to implement it, and people. And I don't know if you're aware, Lester, but you got a great compliment from Michael Moore, leading a county department in a DEF CON talk here a month ago about the great support Maricopa County Recorder Elections receives from Maricopa County as a whole in that great partnership. So what's your strategy? Obviously you made some jokes about it earlier. What's your strategy for attracting, retaining, and keeping the right people engaged? Because obviously you're succeeding at it. I've heard a lot of good things.
Well, to be fair, it's been a mixed bag. So I think we've been able to retain the right people. Much like other government agencies, I'm assuming, Bianca, you've had similar challenges in procuring and hiring people into roles, just because we have to compete against the private sector and industry trends, right? So, so that's a separate topic unto itself. But in terms of some of the things that we do from an organizational perspective, I'll riff a little bit off of that. And so in terms of using Michael Moore as an example, so one of the things that our program does is not just try to provide or quote unquote sell security tools or services to other departments. We do that, don't get me wrong. So we're in the sales business internally within the organization. But we also function, it's kind of an interesting setup or dynamic. We also function kind of like a WWT for the organization in that, so for example, with Michael Moore, I worked with him personally to develop a security program and strategy specific to the recorder's office. And so that was largely, for obvious reasons, based off of my program strategy for the enterprise. But I worked with him to better understand and allow him as the ISO for that organization to kind of define what their needs are. But I helped him put form and structure to that program strategy, which also included a 3-year roadmap. And so he made the choice in that instance to align that with the enterprise strategy because he didn't want to necessarily reinvent the wheel, right? And so I've done that now for a couple of departments, and I continue to offer that. So it's actually in our service catalog of all things that we do consulting services for other departments within the organization, so which may not be typical for other government agencies. But look, at the end of the day, my overarching concern as the CISO for Maricopa County is while I would prefer everybody to use our staff, our resources, our services and controls, I'm more interested that everybody has a minimally acceptable level of security across the board, regardless of what the technology they use, the people that they use, and how they go about it, as long as they have that in place. So if that means I'm working with them to develop a strategy to take them farther away from adopting our tools, so be it, as long as they have a good roadmap to implement something else. So, and so to tie that back to your original question, I'm exposing my staff to a lot of things that they're not accustomed to doing. So you might appreciate this, but my security operations team, we do have a managed MDR service, right? So that way my team's not on the hook 24/7, 365 to respond to alerts, right? And so what have I done? I've expanded our portfolio of services where now my ops team, instead of just watching the wall the whole time, we've got them trained and have given them tools and have created the framework for them to provide and offer red teaming and pen testing services in a limited fashion to the other 55 departments within the county. So they get exposed to new responsibilities, learn new skills, keeps them engaged. They know exactly how that fits within the program strategy, so they know exactly where they fit into the equation on how they're improving security across the board. And we're doing that across the rest of the InfoSec team along those lines. So it's been, I think it's helped us retain and keep the staff interested while at the same time meeting a greater need across the enterprise.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great strategy. I mean, I think, yes, compensation, benefits, all these things matter, but Malcolm Gladwell wrote about how more money makes people happier to a point, and then it stops, right? At that point, people are happy based on the relationships, the team they get to be a part of, how interesting the work they get to do is, and sounds like you're fostering some really interesting and fun work there. Bianca, you get the perspective of dealing with talent on a broader scope, right? Like, obviously, a lot of us focus on just security talent, but you have the full scope of talent beyond just security to think about. What are your thoughts on how organizations should engage and retain top talent?
Yeah, that's one of the top challenges, right? So for us, in terms of recruitment, we really rely on a city's reputation of being a great employer. But also that, right, I mentioned we're very innovative. We're supporting, our workforce in terms of salaries, right? Really looking to be as competitive as possible with other government units around us. We're making sure that they have, professional development opportunities. And then in terms of retention, coming back to that positive culture, so that comes back from the top of our organization, our leadership. So regardless of who the mayor is or a city manager, the trend for the past 30 plus years in the city has been that positive culture has been preserved. So that says a lot, and it's really visible in the fact that many of my colleagues retire from the city. So to put it in perspective, for my IT department, within the next 5 years, 30% of my entire department is eligible to retire. In 5 years, in 8 years, 50%, right, of everyone in my department. So with that, we have to have a retention, recruitment strategy that is long-term, and that's, again, competitive. We have to look at, the younger generation, how do we attract them? Also making sure that internally within a department we have opportunities for career movement, right? So for that means that my teams have to be more collaborative, have to maybe like teams of teams so that there is some cross-training, right? So just an example, 2 of the recent hires within the cybersecurity team have come from other areas of the IT department because of we've been so successful with that. So that's some examples. And then for the larger, world we live in, Arizona, something that I've been very passionate about, right? Again, supporting women within IT, enter the IT work. So thank you, you know all about this. But also making sure, right, that everyone has more opportunities or more awareness of those roles that are available that we don't, have a hard time hiring. So I'm one of the co-founder of the Cybersecurity Council of Arizona. So just a plug. Anthony's my partner in crime there too. So please come talk to us about that. So just in short, we help those who want to enter the cybersecurity field with training, certification, again, training to make sure that they have that support that is so much needed, right, when they think about pivoting or just something there, and also providing them with examples of others who are successful in the field, and having those kind of forums where they can come and engage and ask questions, and have those kind of models that they can look up to.
Yeah, I mean, I love that, right? Because you've got the part of the piece of the engagement in the community and giving back and investing and diversity, right? Like if we're not engaging the entire workforce, we certainly can't go around complaining that we don't have enough good people. So, and it requires engagement and investment. It's great. Anthony, you get a whole different vantage point on it. So what are your thoughts on this?
I think it's in one word that I answer it as Maslow's, well, like 3 words. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? At the end of the day, we all have a set amount of needs. We have the need to feel safe, the need to feel comfortable. The work we do at CCFAZ for the young ladies is to create a comfortable environment for them to come to that they can trust in that security, right? But same thing with even the individuals we work with, actually ourselves, right? We always kind of have, if you can keep that in mind, and keep in mind we're working with a person, not a company, not a role, you're working with a person, right? I think that's really what's going to keep everyone together. We've got a lot of movement. But I think somewhere I heard last week, people don't leave jobs, they leave managers, right? And that is so true in some of the cultures in some of the roles we've been in. So I think that's,
Yeah, they leave managers and they leave cultures, right? Like you hit both. You know, you get a caustic culture or a caustic manager. Even if they're great at what they do, you know, technologically, it's hard to keep a team. And you get a great manager, the team thrives. I think you're on the money there, Anthony. So any other thoughts on this, opening it up before we shift gears a little bit? Anybody, Bianca, Lester, anything to add on Anthony's thoughts? Other things coming to mind?
One thing that I think might help others as well, right? I can always go and say we need more resources, right? Because obviously the risk and there's never enough funding, but even if we have funding and we implement the tools, there's someone who needs to manage those tools and react. So I can say that, you know, every single year when we have that budgeting process, but sometimes when you have a third party, external party come and audit, so that helps sometimes, most times, to say, okay, we see those gaps in terms of capacity and you need to close those gaps otherwise, or there's this risk, and that external party might be more credible than maybe, you know, you as a leader keep saying that. So that's an advice I can share.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so we've got a lightning round at the end, but before we do that, you know, we've got a great crowd here, and I want to open it up and see if we have any questions from the audience. And and then we'll do the lightning round at the very end to close this out. And I'll do my best to walk around with this microphone. I think I should avoid the speakers. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So a question to the panel here. It was already mentioned that sharing and utilizing each other's knowledge is a good thing to do. So you already mentioned there's the Security Council. Are there any other forums that we can utilize to connect and discuss these kind of things? But I think that's very helpful.
So I'll start off. So there's a number of organizations out there. And it really depends on the nature of the information that you're talking about wanting to share and what your comfort level is, right? So like I know Frank Grimmelman here in the front is involved. Yeah, nobody knows Frank. Is with ACTRA, and so they have a Vegas rules approach, right? And so member agencies are allowed to, or are encouraged to share information of a sensitive nature with one of them, including threat intelligence, right? I know, you know, me and you don't have an NDA, but like I've shared information with you and vice versa along those lines, and so that's more of a comfort level. And so I think I've shared like some of our communication tools and then our program strategy.
What are you doing in terms of reporting to the day after the Russia attack? I said, can you share? I didn't expect, you know, I was like, I'll tell you what I'm doing, but I'm not going to share the exact forum and he sent everything, and I just, you know, yeah, amazing.
So I choose at my own risk as a CISO, I choose to trust it. But, you know, if I can't trust Bianca, you know, who's a fellow local government person, then I think I have bigger problems than, you know, sharing that information. So until it burns me, I'm gonna do that, right? And so Government as a whole, I think it's safe to say we're pretty loose about sharing stuff. But I've shared stuff with Mike, and I know him, and and those are things that I can do. Obviously, depending on what the nature of it is, I may have to sanitize it because I can't unilaterally make the call, for organizationally sensitive information per se. But I take maybe a little bit more forgiving approach along those lines. But it depends on the organization, and ultimately, kind of like what Anthony talked about, the concept of trust, right? You tend to trust when you stick your neck out and it doesn't get chopped off, and if you do it often enough, then you're more willing to stick your neck out, and not sweat it. So that's been my experience.
So and then you have organizations like InfraGard, Actig, right? There's
You
should have said that.
Actually, I forgot. I think the biggest thing is the sharing. I go back to that. And I think that one thing is look around the room. Like this is the cream of the crop of cyber in one sense, right? But it also, we are the mentors for bringing up the levels, the comfort level, the involvement in people within this field. So I think my biggest plug is everybody should be a mentor to somebody else that's coming up in this field, so we can help develop the next generation of leaders. Right? We've got a generation that thinks very differently, right? And how do we take that and how do we mold that into something that can actually be effective? And I think it's going to take every one of us, and that's I think the key message is it's all our responsibility to kind of create that for that next wave.
Yeah, I mean, it's so true. Our adversaries are sharing information, so we're in real trouble if we don't. Let's see, there was a question here, and then we'll get to you next. Go ahead, David.
It wasn't really a question but talking about mentorship in public-private sector, I see in the small business areas, unless you're in the manufacturing and you're working with a Raytheon and you're forced to look at a NIST 800-171 and you have CUI and you're going to have to do the 110 controls, most small businesses are not implementing policy procedure. That's where they usually, fail the most. And how can we as cities and counties, anonymize and take some of those policies that you already have a whole team and developed and make them easy for the small business to consume. And they don't need to go down the 15 categories of MITRE, but understanding on password, understanding a lot of times they've already invested in a Fortinet router and switches. They could do subnets, but they're all flat networks. I mean, there's little things they could do that could greatly increase their security. And how can we take all the experience that you guys have and take it down into like 5 areas or 10 areas and tell the small businesses, here's what you can do, and here's some easy forms and policies that can help drive that within these small businesses.
Well, I think just on the policy and procedures, there are a whole bunch of sites that have published that, including ADOA, right? You can find all the policies that Arizona uses on that site and actually download them and customize them. So a lot of this information is out there. I don't know if I think we've all made attempts at trying to catalog this and kind of create this thing, and we haven't been very successful, obviously. But there's a lot of work that has gone into this field with the chamber and the work we've done there. But again, it's out there. Just look for it, and including like career plans and pathways and all that stuff's up on what's this? The CISO site, right? So yeah, the information's out there. I think a lot of people, if you look and if you can point your small businesses to that information, then I think they'll be better off than where they were, right? Anything's better than where they were.
Yeah. Go ahead, Lester.
So I would add, and I can't speak for the other government agencies in the region, but when I was at Mesa and in my current iteration at Maricopa County, short of the SOPs, that's something I would not share for obvious reasons, but any policy and standards that we've adopted, I would definitely be willing to share with anybody who asks, regardless of what sector, because at the end of the day, it's not disclosing what my architecture, my tool set, and all that other good stuff is, right? So, really, I think the cyber community is a lot more giving, no offense, Bianca, than the CIO back when I was in that role. At least from a government perspective, we're a lot more collaborative,
Shots
I
fired.
think.
Shots fired.
So, you know, I have, like, our program strategy, I've shared sanitized copies of that with non-government agencies who have asked me, right? And some of them smaller in organization. And so I maintain those copies. And so it's just knowing the right people, having the right forums, such as these type of, you know, events, that sort of thing. I think if you talk to the right person, I might be willing to share. So, you know, at the end of the day, I know Frank agrees with this. If somebody else's security posture improves, we all benefit from it as a result, right? So that's the mentality I take. So,
Definitely. Anything to add to that, Bianca? Okay, let's see. Next question here, right?
Yeah, two quick questions, if you don't mind. My name is Mike. One, for the CIO and CISO, there's the CISO certification by EC Council. Have either of you taken that, or just wondered if it was worthwhile? I took it, got it, but I didn't know. I wanted to ask someone's perspective who maybe was a CIO or CISO.
Thanks, Mike. I'm going to have our CISO take it tomorrow. It's very important.
Excellent. And
I'm kidding. Yes.
I got to drink to
No,
it.
thank you for that.
Okay,
Yes, obviously
I just wanted
there's-
to know. And then my second question, because you brought it up earlier, Lester, was about, it was more of a statement that we wish we had more sharing amongst Arizona. So I know in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, there's an organization called the Ncfta, National Cyber Forensics and Training Alliance. It was started in 2002. I was lucky enough to get sent there a long time ago. And they gave out certifications. They let you get on the dark web and all that kind of stuff. But they're an alliance between the government and industry so that they can fight things without the industry having to. I know there are rules and regulations now, but industry having to report when they've gotten hit. But there are certain times when maybe they're getting probed. They don't want to announce that, and they can work directly. I also know that Colorado Springs, because I just moved from there here, has the NCC, the National Cybersecurity Center, which is a little different, but again, it's kind of a government state partnership co-op. Do we have something similar to that in Arizona? That's my last question.
yeah, so I'll start off, and then, yeah, I think a couple other people want to chime in. So the short answer is yes. And so I know, having been previously involved with ACTRA, that organization's primary focus is the public-private partnerships. So, and so there's threat intelligence sharing that's occurring along those lines. I know both City of Scottsdale and Maricopa County, we have protocols in place as local government agencies where we do threat intelligence sharing amongst all of us on a regular basis, as well as having a well-defined reporting structure when there are IOCs that we want to kick up. And so we then involve the ACTIC, which is the state's local fusion center along those lines. That's housed in DPS, but then FBI has a role in that, as well as State of Arizona Department of Homeland Security, which cybersecurity is now a function of, as opposed to ADOA. And so there's a couple of different groups along those lines. So.
And then on a needed basis, like this year, so next year we have the Super Bowl in Arizona. So Lester and I and our colleagues, hundreds of our colleagues throughout the region, I would say the state, has been very much involved for the last 6 months or a year prior to the Super Bowl in tabletop exercises, sharing of intelligence, right, getting prepared for this big event next year. So all safety agencies and cyber agency, so we have subcommittees focused on infrastructure, on many areas that obviously need to respond to this.
I think everything's been said. I think the key, the safe answer is yes, we do, and it's called ACTRA.
Yeah, but it is, like, I know it's come up a few times because it really is a big need, right? And there's different kinds of sharing for different levels and different levels of familiarity, right? You need that best friend kind of sharing and peer that you can go out and talk about what you were hit with yesterday that you wouldn't talk about in a big group. You need a Vegas rules type setting where you can share things in a large but trusted group. And then we need to share some things wide and broad, like with the ISACs and ISOs. So I don't think it's one that size fits all, which is why I think it's healthy that there's a variety. And Yeah. Now, shifting gears a bit with this panel, I know we could ask them questions for another 2 hours, but we don't want to be the only 4 people standing between you all and happy hour. Although it looks like the drinks are already free flowing, so maybe that's not a problem. But we're going to do a lightning round to close out. And I know anybody else here wish they could go back in time and give themselves advice, right? Like I'd have bought Tesla stock like 8 years ago. There'd be all sorts of things, you know. I'd know when to buy and sell each house, but I also might have made some different security decisions over the years. So, I mean, the next best thing to a time machine is those who've gone before. And, yeah, so I'll just kind of lightning round for each of you. You know, what's like a 60-second piece of advice you'd give that would apply to people looking to build a security program based upon each of your experience?
In addition to working on your soft skills from a communication written perspective, it's amazing how much time and effort and benefit I've gotten out of becoming, and I don't mean to say this in a derogatory way, but a salesperson. And nothing against the vendors here in the room, but my ability to sell the efficacy and the goals and objectives of the security program at Maricopa County has paid dividends in the form of budgetary requests being fulfilled, all the way to affecting positive adoption of security governance. And so, and this is some of the stuff that I had mentioned that I had shared with Bianca. So my team, we do a daily threat brief that is a documented artifact that we share with all the C-level folks across Maricopa County. We do a summary weekly report along those lines that goes all the way to the county manager's office. We talk about what the threats are that we're seeing based off of a variety of different things, including social media and brand and sentiment, not sediment, within the organization. And it really demonstrates how seriously we're taking our role responsibility. It helps inform why we're doing what we're doing from a program strategy perspective. So we're just not making crap up, frankly, and that there's a rhyme and reason as to why we're asking for this or we're working on that sort of thing. And that marketing and salesman approach or saleswoman approach, as the case might be, has really, the effort has paid for itself, exponentially.
I love it. Sales is pure gold. Back when I used to mentor SEs when I worked at Checkpoint, you'd kind of giving them the pep talk for the job because everybody knows it can be a difficult job. I'd be like, you know what you call somebody who knows how to sell and who understands security technology? You call them a CISO, right? And that sales half is the half. Otherwise, none of the ideas get done. So I love it, Lester. Bianca, how about for you?
I would say as a CIO, you should empower and advocate. So definitely empower your teams, right? In this case, the cybersecurity teams, I empower them as much as I can with funding, resourcing, but also try to stay out of their way, right? Because they're the experts and I rely on that. And then advocate to the board and those who make those decisions in terms of how data and money's funneled down. So really being the liaison between cybersecurity and leadership, the CISO leadership and make sure that I'm effective there.
Yeah, that's excellent. You know, I don't know if my boss is online, but she had to teach me how to talk to execs. I mean, I would have completely bombed if I didn't have a good CIO trying to help me through that. So thanks, Bianca. How about for you, Anthony?
I think mentors, having good mentors. It's funny, Keith isn't here, but Keith is the reason I went into cyber 15-something years ago in one conversation, right? And then having Frank here and some of the other, like Rich is back there somewhere. For me, it has really been kind of mentors, following those mentors and kind of building with them. So taking existing knowledge and creating new knowledge from that and using those relationships and that information, including like calling Mike at 12 at night going, can you look at this thing? I just can't figure this out, right? Like having those types of relationships, I think is what I'd throw on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think relationships make all the difference, right? And I mean, and that's a great one to bring us home on, Anthony, because that's really why we're all here, right? To come together, to build relationships, to share ideas, and hopefully all to come away better prepared, more knowledgeable, and with connections we can call when we're like, oh, what do I do? I've never seen this before. So I love it. thanks to everybody for the great engaged dialogue and for coming out. It's been a fantastic FutureCon. Thank you, Lester, Bianca, and Anthony for the awesome, dialogue and sharing your wisdom with all of us. And let's give all three of our panelists a round of applause. All right, and now we're getting ready for the big moment, the big wrap up. As Kim comes up here. Okay, yeah. Because our stream is still going. Yes.
Can I use this mic? By all means. So we travel about 28 cities across the country, and we wrap up asking our CISO, CIO this question because, first of all, we have a big room full of sponsors, so how about a round of applause for all of our generous sponsors? We definitely couldn't be here without them, but one of the questions they may have to you guys is, we all know you guys are inundated with floods of emails, phone calls. So what does it take for one of these sponsors to get in front of you?
Lester, do you want to take that one first?
So I don't necessarily have a good tactic or approach on how you would do this, but if there is a way from a vendor community perspective, you could gain a better understanding of what my needs are from a programmatic perspective, as opposed to taking the approach of, we were talking about this earlier, about, yeah, you should give me 15, 20 minutes of your time because this is important. It might be important from your perspective, but you having a holistic understanding that I have responsibility, and it's even worse for Bianca because she's in charge of everything, security and technology, but I have a responsibility from an overarching information security program, and you even demonstrating a willingness to try to understand what my priorities are and why now as opposed to, maybe later down the road, would go a long way along those lines. And now that might be a little bit more difficult for vendors who are kind of focused on a particular vertical as opposed to, like, say, a VAR. In the case of VARs, I would definitely say if you're selling a package, so to speak, understand how or where my pain points are, when, and that sort of thing. So
You should say that Kim sent you. No, seriously, yes, that works. Yeah, yes. No, the same as Lester, right? Many government agencies have their roadmap published on their website, so look there and see what their upcoming initiatives, right, that you can engage on. Also, we have RFPs, right, that are published, so obviously make sure you respond to those. So that's one way to win our business. But also your reputation, right? For me, that's very important. If I know that someone that I trust also uses that solution and I can pilot, very much open to that. But again, you have to be very cognizant that we have a limited amount of resources, so we cannot pilot everything that's on the market, right? So having that conversation and see what's the art of the possible and the timing of it. Yeah, but definitely reputation, knowing that someone else was successful with that.
I'm taking notes.
Oh, yeah, okay.
actually, I do want to add one thing. So, and again, maybe it's because I'm an ad hoc salesperson. We've already established that. If you could demonstrate that you've done a little bit of research and investigation about what's important to us, whether that's via LinkedIn, whether it's the news cycle or whatever the case is, that goes a long way as opposed to the boilerplate of, thanks for downloading this white paper, which I know damn well I never downloaded, So yeah, so that would also be of, I think, a selling point, so to speak.
Yeah, I'll agree with everything that's been said so far and just add the awareness that I would say across all the different channels, everything from LinkedIn message to email, it's somewhere, cold calls, it's somewhere of the order of a slow week 50, a busy week 200 a week. So just imagine 200 times a week somebody asking for 10 to 15 minutes next week, right? And then the calendar books out 4 weeks with just standing and regular meetings. So some of it's going into it with a realistic expectation, and I think being places like this make a world of difference, right? Because if you're trying to compete with those 200 other emails and cold calls that are all getting ignored, and then you see the fifth one of, did you see the previous? Did you see the previous? Did you see the previous? Yeah, and I see like half the crowd groaning in recognition of getting, everybody's had those today. But here, engaging in a community like this, having a conversation or a dialogue where you're prepared, as Lester said, for how your product meets a specific need, and then also not trying to shove a square peg into a round hole. If you realize, somebody's already got Nikes and you're selling competing basketball shoes and they look brand new, you just have a friendly conversation about something and realize you're not going to make a sale there, right? Yeah, and that'll buy goodwill for just in general.
Okay, I have hundreds of C-level executives like you that sit on our panels, and thank you guys, because we all know how busy you are, so spending the day here, there were a lot of CISOs, all of you guys, thank you so much, because we know your world is tough and busy, and thanks for spending the day, but those answers seem to pair up with every set of CISOs or C-level execs I'm talking to, so I just think it's interesting for the sponsors to hear that. So how about a round of applause for our panel?